My name's John Saunders. I am Strategic Development Director for a company called 1energy Group. We are an independent developer, deliverer and investor in low carbon heat networks. So that's going to be the broad theme. I'm not Sandy from High Rock. If you want to see Sandy, that session's now at 4 o'clock. They very kindly offered to switch with me because I forgot that I had to pick the kids up tonight. So the main thrust is all going to be heat networks. So a little bit about the kind of context for 1energy. We're a leading independent developer of low and zero carbon heat networks, predominantly in city centres. So we go in and do the really difficult big buildings. We've recently formed a joint venture with our investment partners, a company called Asper. That means that we bring fully funded solutions to bear, and we've committed to be net zero both as a company and the networks that we build. And we're currently active across 4 towns and cities in the UK, and many of those are connecting or propose to connect to NHS sites in all of their glory. So that's kind of our bag. So you'll know this because I'm sure this is going to be in business cases that people are writing. But for us, the main strategic context is we've got to do net zero by 2050, and if we're going to do net zero by 2050, we've got to start doing the difficult stuff around decarbonisation of heating. So, heat accounting for almost a half of energy and about a third of carbon emissions. And a big chunk of that being space heating and hot water within buildings. So clearly this has been a government target for a long time, but as if 2050 and decarbonisation of heating wasn't difficult enough, NHS, I'm pretty sure, is still a 2040 net zero target with some big strides to be made in the start of the 2030s. So if the NHS is going to decarbonise, it's also got to tackle heating. So this basically hangs together most of the 2 days that CEF are supporting at this event. We've got 3 main decarbonisation of heat options. You can decarbonise at a building scale using heat pumps. You can do green gas, low carbon gas, maybe hydrogen, as and when it comes on, or you can do it through a heat network. And I'll talk a little bit about why we think the heat networks are a good option. So for us, heat networks are a really amazing technology that are able to access alternative sources of heat that you probably wouldn't do at a building scale. You might do at campus scale, but some really interesting stuff that makes the whole thing much more effective and efficient. So that might be connection to energy from waste, it might be geothermal, it might be mine water, waste heat from industry, all of the above. And what that means is that actually the performance of heat pumps, if you need them, are going to be much improved. It means that the overall cost of decarbonisation is going to be lower, but also it means that there's a whole load of system benefits that are being delivered. So rather than you having to find lots of additional electrical capacity for lots of air source heat pumps on your site, well actually the requirements that you need are going to be much lower, and actually that's not going to be your problem anymore. That's going to be the problem of the heat network developer and operator. So there's a huge benefit in terms of the scale of stuff that we're doing. When we talk about heat networks, we're talking about the ability to store, so big thermal stores, load shift. So what that means is that we can access lower carbon electricity to run the heat pumps, and what that broadly means is that the kind of carbon content of that heat is going to be lower using a heat network than your own building level solution. There's also, I think, a really interesting benefit around how much work you need to do to your own estate to be able to access this low carbon heat. And I think with a heat network there are some options around running temperatures, around the kind of retrofit, and there's definitely a balance to be struck. With an air source heat pump or another lower carbon, low temperature solution, you're probably going to have to do more to your buildings, and that is obviously more difficult in terms of both budget, but also in terms of disruption to your estate. These heat networks are here, they're ready, not having to wait on something in the future. There's lots of them already, so it's a proven technology. There's about 14,000 of them, and about 2,500 of them are big city-scale heat network projects. And so overall, both in terms of the upfront cost and the ongoing cost, they offer a really competitive solution to deliver low carbon heat in the here and now. So in terms of what these things look like, this one here is a live project that we're working on in Rotherham. So you've got about 30 buildings being connected to a town centre heat network. This is being fed from waste heat from a biomass power station. It's being upgraded with very, very large heat pumps, so about 8 or 9 megawatts of heat pumps and backup boilers on a standalone energy centre, and it's being piped through the town to decarbonise mostly public sector estate. And then the purple on your screen, the purple leg in the sort of southeast corner is the run down to the hospital, where in the first instance we're displacing gas boilers, and then in the long-term options to also take on the gas CHP heat for the hospital. And there's a few numbers there in terms of the scale of investment. I think again the important thing is that you might already have a heat network. If you don't have a heat network, you don't need to be the ones developing one. There are going to be lots of companies that are able to do that for you. That you're really going to be able to act as a catalyst. You're probably the most important customer in most heat network projects. So I think that you need to understand that and use that to your own benefit. There's grant funding available through the Green Heat Network Fund and PSTS. So the way that we normally see this working is that for the building side retrofit and for the connection costs, that's normally a PSTS application, but we know that that's fraught. And then for the other investments, a developer, heat network developer, will be going into the Green Heat Network Fund to secure capital, and that's what we've done on the Rotherham scheme. So it's about a 50 to 60 million pound scheme, and there's about 25 million pounds of government grant going into it, so that we can offer cost-effective low carbon heat to public sector, because just like everyone else, still grappling with the cost of generating low carbon heat versus the cost of using higher carbon heat, and we still haven't squared that, I think, across the country. And so, broadly speaking, the more customers that connect, the more cost effective this is as a solution, and the more benefit there'll be to everyone connected. And I think really it depends on, as a hospital, whether you're kind of looking outwards or looking at your own estate as to whether there's some options here. So I thought I'd just do a kind of whistle-stop tour of some questions that I'd be asking myself if I had an NHS estate. So I think the first one is whether there's a heat network nearby and what the options are to connect to that. Whether you're proximate to a town or city, the rationale being that there's regulation and policy coming forward that will create heat network zones across the large towns and cities. And so even if there's not a heat network nearby, there might well be in the coming years. I think we've spoken a lot about sort of de-steaming as being a really important way of opening options, both on-site and heat network connection options, regardless of the technology. If you're using heat pumps or a heat network, it's going to be easier if you've de-steamed. Thinking about whether you are likely to be a net importer or exporter of energy and what you're up for. Do you have capacity on site already to be the host and look to build outwards rather than the customer looking to bring inwards? Whether there are any contractual barriers to implementing a connection. A lot of NHS sites have done exactly the right thing. They've entered into long-term contracts for probably gas CHP and wider energy performance contracts to help decarbonise. What does that look like? Are you able to do stuff whilst they're live? Can you connect to an external source? How does that all work? And the final one, which I'm afraid is a very difficult one, it will be a recurring theme, is what your capital and revenue budgets look like. Because as we know, it currently costs more to produce low carbon heat than high carbon heat. But I don't know that your budgets have got any bigger. I think they've got smaller. So what does that look like in terms of marrying up the local ambition, the national ambition to meet net zero at pace with the need just to balance the books locally? And I don't think we've found a solution to that one. But there are lots of different ways we can carve up who pays for what, but eventually the stuff still needs to be paid for. So that was a kind of whistle-stop tour of all things heat networks. This is our kind of I guess how can it be a bit easier to engage between private sector and hospitals, and I think a big one is kind of sharing of information, being open access to plant room surveys. So that's something that the majority of organisations will do in assessing your site as a potential. It's not always consistent or super clear from the outside what the decision making and governance process looks like internally, so that then makes it very difficult to know what's being aimed at and to program. So the more that you can help demystify early doors when you're engaging externally, I think that'd be really, really helpful. And the final one is, broadly speaking, we're all prepared to put resource in. We need people on the other side that are championing this work, and an intelligent client team to engage with. And then if that's the case, almost all things are possible. So I'll leave it there. I think we're all having a competition today to see who can get through their presentation quickest. I'm second, I think, in the list. But I'm very happy to take any questions or take away any comments.
Quite interested in the Rotherham district energy scheme. How is it stacking in terms of pence per kilowatt hour compared to, say, gas for the heat, the actual running costs associated with these systems?
Yeah, it's so I don't know, because we don't present it against gas anymore. We're presenting it against a low carbon counterfactual solution, which is for that site a standalone air source heat pump in an energy centre, and it's about 35% cheaper on an ongoing basis than the standalone air source heat pump solution. And then there's it's about 60% saving on the upfront capital, so the connection charge versus the investment in again a standalone air source heat pump.
Is that inclusive of the grant?
Yeah.
It's quite interesting how the numbers stack up.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the numbers are really attractive against a low carbon solution, but if all your budgets are set against gas, then it becomes difficult. So a lot of the stuff that we've done has been looking at spreading the capital costs over a longer term standing charge, trying to have transitional pricing so that we kind of acknowledge that it's going to be difficult, and see what we can do, kind of working in partnership with the different public sector organisations. Good. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm from Canada, first of all, so I find it very interesting that just energy for in different places. This is different. You said, like in the Rotterdam, you're taking the waste of the energy from a biomass power plant. What are the other options? Obviously, in some ways, energy
So for you, those of you still here, just asking about other options from the waste heat from the biomass power station at Rotherham. So I should say that biomass power station is going to just carry on running, and we're taking it from way down the process, about 28 degrees before it goes out the flue, sticking it through heat pumps. we've looked at standalone air source heat pumps. We're delivering that one in our Bradford scheme, but there's issues there around urban settings and cold pluming, as well as it's just not as efficient as other technologies. We looked at shallow and deep geothermal, but we weren't able to get the sort of temperatures, or unlikely to get the sort of temperatures within about 2 kilometres, which is where, in fact, GT Energy, who are here, thought that they'd be trying to drill to. The upside wasn't sufficient, so this was the best available technology for that particular solution. Other projects, we've got heat from a wastewater treatment plant, so sewage treatment plant essentially.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Yeah, so that looks good. Not without its challenges. And then another one, which is a pure water source heat pump option. So broadly heat pumps, but lots of different flavours of them in terms of the source sort of temperature.
I was recently at a conference in Canada and in Toronto at one of the large university hospitals. They're going to use sewage water, like sewage, before it gets to the treatment plant. So I found that one very intriguing.
Yeah. So just saying that in Toronto they're going to use heat from the sewers rather than the treatment plant. In this country, a company that used to be called 1energy, I think Recirc now do heat offtake out of sewers. Clearly it's untreated, and government in fact is doing a whole body of work to work out what the kind of commercial structures would need to be in order to take heat out, because essentially what you want to try and do is create zones where no one else can take any of your energy out of where there's muck, there's brass. So I think that's a really interesting option, because all of our towns and cities have that running beneath our feet. It's not something that we've looked at yet.
But you've obviously heard it. So.
Yeah. As I say, there's a study going on. I think it's connected to Bloomsbury in London with it must be Thames Water, I would assume. Looking at exactly that. And I think it's pretty good. I think the mean temperature is something like 18 degrees. Kind of almost year round, so really it's looking about the difficulty of access, versus the upside that you get compared to a river at maybe 12 degrees, this at 18. So I think it makes sense in terms of the numbers. You're tapping into a regulated utility, and there's challenges there, but yeah, who knows? Good. Thank you all.